It's November of 2001. The Gamecube was about to release in North America, and with it, a lineup of launch titles. From this batch, you could have gotten stuff like Wave Race Blue Storm, Super Monkey Ball, Star Wars Rogue Leader, and who could forget the legendary Tarzan Untamed. Oh, and some game called Luigi's Mansion, I guess. But outside of those legendary titles, there was one game from this lineup that I had when I was a kid. A game I always had a lot of fondness for, even with its flaws. That being Batman Vengeance. I remember seeing it at a GameStop in the late 2000s and thinking, wow, this cover art looks really cool. Keep in mind, at the time, I haven't watched the original animated series or the new Batman Adventures, so this was pretty much the first time I was ever exposed to the DCAU in some way. So I picked it up and man, I loved it. This was my definitive Batman game at the time. The atmosphere, how Batman felt, the gadgets, the storyline, it was all so good. But then a little game called Arkham Asylum came out and I played the rest of that series. And I haven't played this game since. But now it's been quite a bit since I've played it, and you know, it's just such a fascinating game. I just want to talk about it. So if you don't know anything about this game, this was based on the new Batman Adventures, basically season 4 of the animated series. It was published by Ubisoft and developed by their Montreal team. Yeah, like the same developer who made all these. But back in the late 90s/early 2000s, Ubisoft did a good amount of licensed games, which is just kind of wild to think about nowadays. Like the same developer who made stuff like Far Cry and Assassin's Creed also made Donald Duck Going Quackers and Open Season. That's just really funny to me. But yeah, they were also the publisher of the DCAU Batman-centric games from this era, like Gotham City Racer, Chaos in Gotham, and the sequel to Vengeance, Rise of Sinzu. Maybe we'll talk about some of these other titles at a later point. But today's focus is on Vengeance. It came out on pretty much all the 6th-gen systems, and like I said, it was a launch title for the GameCube and even the Xbox in a few territories. So initially, I was actually planning to play the PC version, as I assumed it would look and run the best. And while that is certainly the case, I mean the load times are pretty much non-existent and it definitely looks the sharpest. Plus, I surprisingly got it running well on my laptop despite how old it was. However, the controls were a mess. Firstly, I didn't want to use keyboard and mouse because I just don't want to play a game like this with that setup. And secondly, this game has god-awful controller support. I could barely get it to work, and remapping stuff was a pain. So I just gave up and stuck with the GameCube copy that I still had. I mean, the most I'd miss out on is the lightning fast load times and the better quality graphics, but even then, it's still pretty fast, and honestly, I kind of feel with the lower graphical fidelity on the GameCube, kind of works better with the darker atmosphere than it does on PC. But that's just me. Anyways, let's finally get into this. By the way, is it just me, or does the main menu theme sound like the Krazoa Palace theme from Star Fox Adventures? I swear, it sounds exactly the same. So after dealing with another one of the Joker's schemes and his apparent death, Batman must deal with the sudden appearances of Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy, which may or may not be all part of a much grander scheme conducted by the Joker. Yeah, I'm not even gonna bother hiding it. Yeah, of course he's not dead. They don't even try to hide it in the actual story. It's mostly about how everything is connected and what Joker's big plan is. It's really nothing that crazy compared to other Batman stories, but that's not really why I enjoy this plot. Nah, the thing that makes me really enjoy this storyline is how well they emulated the tone and characters from the new Batman Adventures. The writing, while I can't say this is like the best Batman story I've ever seen, it still captures exactly how an episode of the series would be like, and everyone feels exactly how they do in the series. It also helps that they got pretty much everyone to reprise their roles from the show, and they still do a great job, especially the late Kevin Conroy as Batman. Hearing his voice again in this game was an absolute treat.
Alright, keep an eye on Harley.
Are you gonna trust her?
Not at all, but she's the closest thing we have to a lead.
Also, the FMVs still look great. Like, personally, whenever I see a 2D character translate into 3D, usually it's a pretty mixed bag, but I gotta say for here, they do a really good job translating them into 3D. In terms of the in-game stuff, it's a little bit more of a mixed bag. I think the models and environments look alright, but you can definitely tell it's a very early 6th gen game. I mean, again, it was a launch title for the Gamecube, so it's a little rough around the edges, but I think for the time, it still looks okay. One thing that has definitely held up, though, is the atmosphere. Oh, it's so good. It perfectly captures the new Batman adventures so well. I absolutely love it. Like, I think the music is good. I do really enjoy some of the pieces that play during the bosses, but I actually like how most of the levels don't have music, and instead it's just this dead silence with the only thing you hear is just the atmosphere of the level going on. And I think that is just really cool. So, as for the gameplay, well, it's a 3D adventure game. You do some platforming, fight some enemies, a few puzzles here and there. It's what you'd expect for a Batman game. I think the controls feel great. This is the first 3D Batman game where I feel they really nailed how the Dark Knight would feel in a 3D space. I mean, before, you had the Batman Beyond game and Batman Robin on PlayStation? Yeah, not really much competition there. But yeah, I think the platforming and moving Batman around feels great. I have no issues with any of that. We also have a good amount of gadgets to use, like the standard batarangs with electrical variants, the grapple hook, a detonator, a net, etc. Some are definitely better than others, like I rarely use the net at all, but you got a good amount of options, though you do need to get used to using the first person mode. See, whenever you select a gadget, you're automatically switched into this first person mode. It's perfectly fine, I don't mind it, but I definitely find it unnecessary. I would prefer something akin to what the Arkham games do, where you select a gadget and you just automatically use it without going into a weird different perspective. Speaking of the Arkham series, gosh, it has a way better combat system than Vengeance because the fighting here is not very good. So once you get up to an enemy, you enter a fighting mode of sorts, and it's painfully basic. There is nothing to this. You just mash buttons until you win. No combos, no interesting strategy. I guess the power moves are kinda neat, but that's about it. It is by far the worst part about this game, and it has you do these quite a bit. When you defeat an enemy, you don't knock them down for good. They will keep getting back up. The only way to knock them down for good is either them falling into a pit, which isn't super often, or by using the bat cuffs. So I'm a little split with this system because on the one hand, Batman can't just knock them down for good? It definitely seems really unnecessary that he has to cuff them to make them stay down, since most other Batman games you could just knock an enemy down for good. But on the other hand, I do think this kinda adds a little bit of a risk and reward type element. See, you don't have that many bat cuffs. You have a very limited amount you can carry, and there aren't many of them you can find throughout the stages, so you kinda have to think about when you should use them when you defeat an enemy. Do you risk using one now to keep them down, or save it for a better time? It's an interesting element that I really dig. Like, don't get me wrong, I would much rather just knocking the enemy down for good like any other Batman game, but I do like this risk and reward type system it's going for. Now, in terms of the actual stages, I'd say I enjoyed most of them. Again, they've got a great atmosphere going for each of them. My favorites were probably any of the stages in Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy's chapters. Those were definitely the highlight for me. I love the chilling atmosphere of running down this ice-filled laboratory, and the destroyed chemical plant has this very eerie tone going for it. It's great all around. Oh, and the stage where Batman is getting chased by the GCPD is so good. The atmosphere with the rain and that intense music, oh, it's great. The only stage I really disliked was this factory stage in Chapter 4. It goes on for way too long, the checkpoints are very spread out apart from each other, so if you die, you have to do a large part of the stage, and if you miss turning the valves, you have to backtrack all the way to the beginning. It sucks. This was not a very fun stage. There were also the Batplane and Batmobile stages. They were okay. It's a fine break from the regular stages, I guess. I don't know, they were just kinda there for me. I really like the puzzles here too. They complement Batman's detective side really well. They're not super crazy, but a good amount of these are pretty fun. They're a nice little brain teaser from time to time. As for the bosses, I quite like these too. They're not hard, like the first fight with Joker is over in like 10 seconds if you know what you're doing. But bosses like Freeze, Poison Ivy's Plant Monster, and so on were really fun fights. The game itself is very short though. You can beat it in under 2 hours, and unfortunately there is nothing else to do after you're done. I guess you can find those secret cheats, but that's about it. I do feel this game should have had maybe some extra challenges from when you're finished with the story. Like, I don't know, why not have some more platforming challenges? Some more stealth-based challenges, or even more puzzles to do. Just something to do after you're done with the main story, and not just some extra cheats you could use. So, would I recommend this nowadays? Well, it's a little tricky to say because it is a game that is pretty flawed. The combat just sucks, and you're going to be doing it quite a bit. And in general, I feel if you want to play a really good Batman game, well, the Arkham series are absolutely the way to go. Not to mention, way more easily accessible to get, unlike this game, which unfortunately has never seen a re-release. Personally, I still like this game. It's not incredible, but I feel it's the first 3 Batman game that really nailed what it's like to be the Dark Knight, at least for the most part. If you can handle some jank from time to time, and you're really big into Batman, especially the DCAU, then yeah, I would give this game a shot. It's definitely an interesting part in Batman's video game career. Before the Arkham series came out, this was basically the closest we got to being Batman in a video game. It changed how we saw Batman in video games, and in that respect, I do think it still holds some importance, even if I think it's aged in a lot of areas. But before we end today's video, I also want to talk about the GBA version. I was just gonna talk about the console version in this video, but since I never played the Game Boy Advance version before, why not cover it here too? I'll give it some time in the spotlight. So, while the story here is pretty much the same as the console version, now Robin and Nightwing are here. Yeah, they were completely absent in the console version. It's pretty cool to see them here. I also think it's interesting how they still use a few FMVs from the console version, and my gosh, they look so crusty. I love it. I will say, when we get into the actual graphics, it does look really messy. It's mostly the backgrounds, like some just get really hard to look at, and this kind of affects gameplay too. It gets pretty hard to tell what's a platform and what isn't. It got really bad during the stages during the city rooftops and the plant neighborhood. The depth perception can be a nightmare. I do think the actual character sprites look alright though. I love the idle animation with Batman. I think that looks really cool. This is a 2D platformer, and it's pretty simple, just get to the end. It's almost reminiscent of the NES Batman game. You still have a few gadgets like the grapple hook, the batarangs, and even healing, which is the only way to heal in this game, by the way. You only get 3 and that's it. Kind of an interesting system right there, but I don't really find this game too difficult, at least in the main platforming stages. Like, the hardest part is honestly just a few stages, with the whole not being able to tell which is part of the background and which is a platform, like I said before. And again, it's only really a problem for a few stages. Otherwise, most of the other levels were a breeze. I actually had a good amount of fun with them. It helps Batman feels great to control. You do still have the Batmobile and Batplane stages like the console version, though with much more emphasis given to them. There is a lot more stages with these two vehicles. The Batmobile, you're just trying to make it to the end within the time limit. It's pretty fun, though they do get pretty tight near the later stages. The Batplane stages were surprisingly really difficult. Like, you're going to be dying a lot in these stages since you don't have that much health. And there are so many enemies and projectiles on screen. I still enjoyed them, but they are definitely way harder than the console version. We also have another gameplay style with Robin, and his stages were pretty fun. They're more about puzzles, with you having to move these boxes around and also hacking these doors with this RC car, which, now that I think about it, the first LEGO Batman also had Robin control an RC car to unlock stuff. I wonder if it was a reference to this. But yeah, these levels were really fun. It's a really nice break from the 2D platforming stages, and it still keeps that puzzle element that was featured in the console game. The bosses were also pretty good. Definitely much harder than the bosses in the console version. I mean, the first fight with Joker is way harder than any boss in the console version. But fights like Mr. Freeze, Ivy's Plant, Harley Quinn, and especially the final Joker fight are really good. Again, it is a pretty short game, you could beat it in around an hour, but you can get some replay value unlike the console version. You unlock Advanced Mode, where you have to play through the game again, but this time looking for these data discs that are now in the stages. It's not much, but at least you get something more worthwhile to do than just finding random cheat codes. So yeah, I surprisingly really like the GBA version. It's a fun little game. I never played it before. I had no nostalgia for it, unlike the console version, but I'm really glad I checked it out. If you're looking for a really fun 2D Batman game, then absolutely check out the GBA game. It's a really solid game. And that's all we have for today. If you liked this video, give it a like, and if you're new here to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Plus, if you've ever played these games, what do you think of them? I'm curious what you all feel about these games nowadays. And heck, if you want me to cover more Batman or superhero related games in the future, I definitely would be down to talk about stuff like Rise of Sin Tzu, the Spider-Man games, or heck, even stuff like Teen Titans. There's lots to explore. Let me know in the comments below. I hope you all have an amazing day, and take care. Bye!